Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the Blonde Who Read Nabokov. It was 12 minutes past midnight, which is the kind of hour that doesn't bring roses. In Wolfe's brownstone at that time, it meant one of two things. Either my milk had gone tepid or trouble was calling long distance. I was parked at Wolfe's desk, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, and his afternoon dictation spread out like a battlefield on the blotter. Wolfe had gone up an hour earlier, leaving me to choose between polishing his sentences or raiding Fritz's icebox. I just started a debate with myself over grammar versus cold chicken when the phone split the quiet like a cleaver. Phones after midnight are not benevolent. They don't announce inheritances or engagements. They say corpse, cop, or crisis, usually in that order. I scooped the receiver and went with my standard patter. West 35th Street, Archie Goodwin presiding. What came through wasn't a bark from Kramer or a groan from a drunk. It was a woman, young by the pitch with a tremor sharp enough to shave ice. And class 2, you can't fake vowels that polished. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked, breath hitching. "Sorry, wrong department. You've got Archie. Mr. Wolfe is, shall we say, dreaming of Byzantium." There was a pause, like she was deciding whether to hang up or gamble. Then, "Please, you must help me. I have to see him tonight." "That's a tall order, sister. My boss doesn't keep nightclub hours. He keeps monastery hours, with orchids instead of monks." Her breath caught again, half sob, half anger. "It's blackmail, and worse. Something was stolen, a manuscript, a book, Russian, a book no one should have read." That stopped me. I've had dames tell me everything from missing poodles to poisoned husbands, but Russian literature as contraband was a new card in the deck. "Russian, huh? Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, or one of the new imports?" A pause. "Nabokov, you must have heard." "Sure," I said, though the truth was I'd seen the name in the Gazette and thought it was a brand of vodka. "So, what about this Nabokov? You losing sleep over commas or corpses?" Her voice dipped. "If I talk now, I'll be heard. He'll find out. I'll come to you, in the morning. But promise he won't turn me away." My name is Lydia Vance. Before I could reel her in with who, what, where, she was gone. A sharp click, then silence. I stayed there, receiver dead in my hand, staring at Wolfe's blotter as if it might explain what a blonde with vowels like champagne was doing with Nabokov at midnight. "Archie?" The voice came from the stairs. Wolfe's voice, gravel rolled in velvet. I turned to see him, vast and rumpled in a mustard silk robe, descending as if the brownstone were the Senate, and he was Rome's last orator. His bare feet offended my sense of propriety. "Confound you," he muttered. "Your raised tone reached me. Why are you bandying words at this hour?" I set the receiver down and leaned back. "Because, sir, when a lady calls at midnight whispering blackmail and Nabokov, it feels rude to hang up." Wolfe's brows knitted. He moved to his chair, the yellow one that fit him like a throne, and lowered himself with a sigh that rattled the lamplight. "Explain." I gave him the gist. The voice, the panic, the manuscript, the Russian name that wasn't vodka. Wolfe listened, eyes half-lidded, fingers steepled like a cathedral. When I finished, he grunted. "Pfui. Females at midnight are either hallucinations or harbingers of toil, and you, confound it, encourage them." "Not me. The phone did all the work. But she said blackmail. She said Nabokov." "Bah, a fashionable émigré novelist. No concern of mine." Wolfe reached for the bell cord, tugged, and then reconsidered, letting it drop. Fritz was asleep. Disturbing him for beer at this hour was an abomination even Wolfe wouldn't commit. Still, his eyes opened a fraction wider. "A manuscript. A stolen manuscript. That touches on commerce. On publishing. That is different," I smirked. "You're warming up. Shall I start chilling glasses?" "Archie." He shut his eyes, tone solemn. "We do not admit clients at midnight, nor do we lend ear to anonymous voices speaking of Russian trifles. If she calls again, only then, will I consider. Otherwise, fouaille." "Sure, But she didn't sound like a trifler. She sounded like a blonde on the edge of a nervous breakdown. If you want me to start a file, I'll label it Nabokov and the Nervous Blonde. Wolfe opened one eye. Spare me your levity. Nabokov, bah. Literature has always been the handmaiden of vanity. But blackmail is the consort of murder. You may prepare a memorandum, record her words exactly. That was Wolfe. Tell him you've been threatened with mayhem, and he prescribes paperwork. I slid into the typewriter chair and rolled a fresh sheet. The keys clacked steady as a clock, while Wolfe's heavy breathing filled the room like an organ pedal. 12:12 a.m. Caller, female, refined accent, probable age, mid-20s, claimed blackmail, stolen manuscript, a Russian book no one should have read. Identified name Nabokov, identified herself as Lydia. When I finished, Wolfe had dozed with his chin sunk, but the moment I tore the sheet free, he spoke. Place it in the safe, under miscellany, tentative. I did as told. The safe's iron door closed with a soft groan, swallowing the page whole. Archie? Wolfe shifted in his chair. If she comes tomorrow at a respectable hour, we shall hear her. Otherwise, forget it. Right, I said. Forget the first blonde in history to lose her cool over a Russian sentence. Wolfe's eyes flickered, the faintest amusement. You persist in mockery. But Nabokov, yes, unusual. If one were to cloak ledgers or codes, it would be in the pretentious folds of émigré prose. He heaved himself up. But enough. To bed. He mounted the stairs, robe dragging like a cloak. At the landing he paused, turned his head just enough and rumbled, Archie, if she deceives us, I will withdraw at once. Remember. Sure, I said. If she's lying, you'll quit. But if she's telling the truth, we've got a blonde, a book, and a bag of blackmail on our hands. Sweet dreams. He vanished upstairs. The house settled back to silence. Outside, Manhattan's night hissed with tires on wet pavement. I looked at the telephone, quiet now, and wondered what kind of publisher, crook or corpse, was sitting under the name Nabokov, waiting to be unwrapped. I poured the rest of my milk, sour now, down the kitchen sink. Trouble had called. It hadn't left its name, but it had promised to stop by. And in this house that meant only one thing. Wolfe's orchids were about to get second billing. The next morning I was halfway through a glass of milk and a crossword puzzle when the bell rang at 10:47 sharp. That was nearly criminal timing in our household, because at 11 on the dot Wolfe abandons all mortal cares for his orchids. A caller arriving 13 minutes before orchid hour was like a commuter sneaking onto the Brooklyn Bridge 1 minute before rush. Possible, but liable to end in bruises. I headed for the door because Fritz doesn't, and swung it open to find a blonde who could have stopped traffic on Fifth Avenue. She had that kind of polish that doesn't come from Woolworth counters, a fur-trimmed jacket in early spring, gloves the colour of ivory, and hair set in waves sharp enough to cut glass. Her eyes were ice blue, but the expression in them wasn't chill. It was panic trying to dress as poise. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked. Her voice was the same one that had jittered through the telephone 12 hours earlier. "You're in luck," I said. "You've got Archie Goodwin at your service, and Mr. Wolfe is vertical and possibly taking fluids. Come on in before he decides to embargo the day." She stepped past me, leaving a faint trace of perfume that didn't belong in our brownstone. I ushered her into the office, where Wolfe sat planted in his yellow chair like a mountain contemplating erosion. He wore a brown suit with a vest, because even a pending orchid session demanded decorum. He didn't rise. He never does. He just inclined his head and gestured one broad hand at the red leather chair. "Sit. State your name." "Lydia Vance." She lowered herself, smoothing her skirt. The gloves came off, but the tremor in her fingers stayed. "I work at Harriman and Green." "A publishing firm," Wolfe intoned, as though announcing an unpleasant weather report. "Archie has made me aware of your nocturnal indiscretion. Proceed." She looked at me, then back at Wolfe. "I don't know how much Mr. Goodwin told you." "Everything," Wolfe said. "And more than you intended. The manuscript, the book, the blackmail, Nabokov." Her lips parted, then snapped shut. She lit a cigarette, uninvited, which earned her one arched brow from Wolfe, and drew a shaky plume. "Yes, the manuscript. She faltered, eyes darting to Wolfe's shelves of reference tomes as if they might judge her. I found a draft. It wasn't meant for me. It was coded, disguised as parody, numbers in the margin, nonsense lines embedded in the prose. It wasn't a novel. It was a ledger. Wolfe's lids drooped. And whose fraud does this ledger betray? I can't be certain. That's why I need help. She leaned forward, smoke curling from her fingers. If I guess wrong, I'll be ruined. But I know enough. Someone powerful at Harriman and Green, money laundering through phony manuscript sales. I shouldn't have seen it, but I did. Archie Goodwin, me, was watching everything. The way she shifted in the chair, the way her gaze slid across the bookshelves like she was rehearsing. You seem to have practiced that speech, I said. Tried it in front of the mirror, maybe the cat? She flushed. I'm telling you the truth. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair. And your mention of Nabokov. She exhaled smoke, shaking her head. The draft imitated émigré writers. Parody. It was a mask. Nabokov was named to throw off suspicion, but it hid the accounts. Pfui, Wolfe said, but softly, which meant he wasn't dismissing her outright. Blackmail? Her hands trembled. She opened her handbag and drew out a torn envelope. Inside was half a note written in block capitals. Stop asking, or you will stop breathing. The stationery had a faint watermark, an elaborate crest barely visible in the morning light. I leaned closer. Nice touch. Watermark stationery for your average threat. Must have cost the killer extra at the corner shop. She shook her head quickly. It's not ordinary. I recognized it. Our firm orders only from Winfield's, a stationer on Madison. Exclusive. Wolfe extended a hand like a magistrate and took the scrap. He studied it, nostrils flaring, then set it on the blotter. Archie? Yes, sir? Make a notation. Watermark, Winfield's Madison Avenue. Exclusive to Harriman and Green. Noted. I rolled carbon into the typewriter and tapped it out. Lydia watched me as if the act of typing granted her testimony the weight of scripture. Miss Vance, Wolfe said, voice suddenly grave, you insist you are followed? Yes. She twisted her gloves. Twice this week a man in a grey hat lingered outside my apartment, and yesterday a car trailed me from Madison to my street. Description? I couldn't see clearly, but I know. That was thin gruel. Plenty of women thought they were followed. Most of them had simply noticed the postman twice. Still, her fear was real enough. You can fake poise, but you can't fake the little tremor in a cigarette ash. Wolfe shut his eyes. You have not deceived me yet, but deception is the certain end of my assistance. Be warned. Archie will take a retainer. She blinked. How much? 5,000, Wolfe said. Half in advance. She gasped. That's impossible. I could manage. Pfui, then go elsewhere. Wolfe opened his eyes, final as a guillotine. She looked at me in appeal. I shrugged. Business was business, and Wolfe's appetite for fees rivaled Fritz's appetite for veal. She fumbled in her bag, produced a checkbook and scribbled. The signature came with a flourish. She tore it out, hands shaking, and slid it across. Wolfe inspected it as though it were a rare orchid. Very well. You will provide me with every detail you have. Names, times, drafts, and your precise discovery. Archie will arrange. I escorted her out, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Vance, the boss is gruff but thorough. He'll earn every penny. Just don't leave out a single comma. He hates lies worse than clichés. She gave me a tight smile. I don't lie, Mr. Goodwin. I only fear. When the door closed behind her, I went back to the office. Wolfe sat gazing at the torn envelope on the blotter as though it were a Rosetta Stone. Well? I asked. Archie, he said, literature and deceit are old allies, but a parody concealing ledgers, that is ingenuity. It merits inquiry. The clock chimed 11. Wolfe heaved himself up, reached for his cane, and declared, Orchids, not a minute less. I will hear no more until 1 o'clock. And up he went, leaving me with a cigarette stub in the ashtray, a torn envelope, and the distinct impression that Nabokov was about to ruin my week. At 2:14 in the afternoon, just after Fritz had presented Wolfe with an omelette that would have made Paris weep, I found myself in Midtown Manhattan on the Publishers' Row, pushing through a revolving door polished to the luster of a banker's conscience. Harriman and Green, the brass plaque said, and it looked the part. Glass doors, walnut panelling, and a lobby where the smoke alone could have edited a manuscript. Wolfe had dispatched me with the wave of a hand and the warning that orchids would not wait for liars, meaning if Miss Vance's tale didn't pan out, I was to return with my tail between my legs and his wrath in my ears. The place was a beehive. Stenographers clicked at typewriters in rapid-fire Morse code, clerks shuffled proofs, and the air smelled of ink, paper, and ambition. Publishing is the one racket where people commit murder with adverbs. I was greeted, or more accurately sized up, by a receptionist with horn-rimmed glasses and the expression of a woman who had seen too many poets unpaid. She jerked her head toward the main offices, and I walked into a room that looked like a stock exchange for egos. Harriman himself came first, a broad man with cheeks that had never missed a luncheon, his suit straining from prosperity. He pumped my hand like he was auctioning it. "Mr. Goodwin, yes? From Wolfe? Lydia mentioned you might come. We're honoured." That honoured came out like suspicious. His partner Green slouched behind him, lean, nervous, his tie crooked, eyes darting as if punctuation marks were chasing him. He muttered something about deadlines and slithered toward his office. I was introduced to two more. Marcus Bellamy, an editor with slick hair and ambition oozing from his pores, and Walter Bristow, a proofreader who looked like he'd been carbon copied from a gravestone, stooped, weary, with ink on his cuffs and despair in his eyes. They gave me the once-over and decided I was either muscle or trouble, and in this house they were synonyms. I'd barely had time to note the manuscript stacks, towering, chaotic, smelling like the sweat of starving writers, when it happened. A scream. It wasn't theatrical, it was sharp, cut short, and it came from the rear archive room. People surged like cattle at the sound of thunder. I moved fast, which is my specialty, and reached the door first. Inside, under the weak glow of a desk lamp, lay Lydia Vance. She was slumped across a wooden desk, her blonde hair spilling like a cheap metaphor over scattered pages. An overturned glass dripped gin onto the floor, the bottle still open beside her. The smell of alcohol clashed with the sharper, bitter tang that said poison louder than any coroner. For a second the room froze. Publishers, clerks, and hangers-on caught between horror and curiosity. Then chaos broke. Voices shouted, papers fluttered, and someone whispered too loudly, "She was Harriman's girl, wasn't she?" I bent close. Her handbag was missing. I'd seen it in our office that morning. Small, black, with a gold clasp. Gone now. My gut said it carried more than lipstick. By the time I stood, the law had arrived. The elevator disgorged Inspector Kramer, cigar clamped like a cannon, with pearly Stebbins on his heels. They looked around the carnage like farmers eyeing a slaughtered cow. "Goodwin," Kramer barked. Of course you're here. If I found you at a quilting bee, I'd know someone was dead under the doilies." "Afternoon, Inspector. You missed the gin." He barreled past me, examined the body, and scowled so hard the room shrank an inch. "Poison," he muttered, not waiting for lab results. He had the nose for it. Stebbins growled, "Figures. Pretty dame mixed up with publishers. That's like mixing butter with dynamite." Kramer whirled on me. "Explain, and if you leave out a single comma, I'll haul you in." I gave it to him straight. Wolfe had sent me to verify a story. Lydia had talked manuscripts and blackmail, and now she was past tense. He didn't like it. He never does. "Another one dies under your nose," he snapped, and Wolfe's shadow behind it. "You expect me to swallow coincidence?" "Inspector, Wolfe swallows only beer and Fritz's menu. Murder disagrees with his digestion." That earned me a glare that could have soured milk. He barked orders at the uniforms. Cordon the place. Check every handbag. Interview every clerk. The office erupted into the usual circus. Reporters sniffing, clerks sobbing, Bellamy protesting too much, Harriman blustering about reputations. Kramer cornered Green, whose hands shook like a debut novelist. "You know anything about this?" Green stammered. "She was distraught, Inspector, but surely she wouldn't—" He stopped, realizing suicide was a poor shield. Meanwhile, Bellamy sidled close to me, voice low. "You know, she was close to Harriman. Very close. People talked. Maybe she was jealous, maybe she knew too much." That smelled like a red herring. Too pat, too eager. Bellamy wanted the spotlight turned elsewhere, which meant he had something to hide, or thought he did. I filed it away. Kramer puffed on his cigar and rounded back on me. You'll sit tight, Goodwin. Don't think you're walking out until I get Wolfe on the phone. He'll answer for this. Sure, I said. You've got the number. Try after 6. Before then, he's with orchids. Unless you've got a warrant to haul him out of the plant rooms, in which case wear armour. Kramer swore, something unprintable, and stomped off to badger Harriman. Stebbins planted himself at the door like a bulldog on a bone, glaring at me as though glaring could handcuff a man. I leaned against a filing cabinet, watching the body being draped, the clerks whispering, the publishers scheming. Lydia Vance had come to us for help and ended up poisoned among manuscripts. Her handbag was missing, her secret draft too, and Wolfe was waiting uptown for me to bring back facts. At 3:12, while Kramer ranted at Harriman about subpoenas, I pulled out my notebook and scrawled the essentials. Lydia Vance, dead, archives room, poison gin, handbag missing, rumours, affair with Harriman, red herring, Bellamy nervous, Green shaky, Wolfe's fee intact. I closed the book and slipped it into my pocket. When Kramer stormed back, face purple, I gave him my best smile. Inspector, as always, it's been a privilege. I'll let Wolfe know you're keeping the city safe, one publishing house at a time. He jabbed his cigar at me like a weapon. Get out. But don't think you're clear. This stinks of Wolfe's meddling, and I'll pin it on him if it's the last thing I do. I tipped my hat. You'll have to get in line. And with that, I left the glass and brass hive of Harriman and Green, the scent of poison still in my nostrils, knowing that Wolfe's brownstone was about to become the only stage in town where the next act could be played. At 4:37 sharp, I pushed through the front door of the brownstone, carrying the smell of typewriter ink and poison gin with me. The house greeted me with its usual calm, carpet muffling my steps, faint orchid perfume drifting from upstairs, and the tick of the grandfather clock keeping time like a metronome for Wolfe's patience. I dropped my hat on the rack and made for the office. Wolfe was already installed in his chair, bulk settled like a boulder in its native crevice. He had reappeared from the plant rooms a half-hour early, which meant one thing. My call to Fritz about Lydia's death had reached him while he was admiring orchids. That was a felony in this household. He didn't waste breath. Report. I sat on the corner of his desk, partly to annoy him. Your Midnight Blonde is now a headline. Poisoned in the archives at Harriman and Green. Body slumped over manuscripts, gin on the floor, handbag missing. His eyes opened fully, rare as a solar eclipse. Confound it. Clients dying under my nose. It is intolerable. Intolerable. Technically under my nose. She was still breathing when she left here. He jabbed a finger at me. Semantics. Our repute is imperiled. We must salvage it. Fritz entered then, bearing a tray with sandwiches stacked like architecture. Roast beef with horseradish, if my nose was right. He set it down and departed without a word, as discreet as a bishop's shadow. Wolfe seized a sandwich with surprising vigour. Enumerate every soul present when you arrived at that infernal office. Sure. Harriman, the fat half of the partnership, smug enough to trademark it. Green, the lean half, nervous as a rabbit at a greyhound race. Marcus Bellamy, editor, slick and sweaty. Walter Bristow, proofreader, one foot in the grave and the other in ink, plus a pack of clerks and stenographers who could alibi each other in triplicate. And you? Always, I said, along with Inspector Kramer and Stebbins, who arrived after Lydia's collapse. Kramer's cigar was first on the scene, naturally. Wolfe chewed, scowling. Motive? Harriman has reputation to protect. Green looks like guilt in a tie. Bellamy's got ambition dripping from his ears. Bristow probably resents everyone younger than Methuselah. As for Lydia, she had something on them. Blackmail, fraud, or both. She carried her handbag into this house this morning. It wasn't at the crime scene. Somebody lifted it. That got him. His head went back, eyes narrowed. Her handbag. Gone. Vanished between here and the archives. Phooey. He brushed crumbs from his vest. It contained the pages, the draft. She told us as much without speaking it outright. I raised an eyebrow. She said she found a parody manuscript hiding ledgers. She didn't say she stuffed it in her purse. She didn't need to. You observed it here, did you not? I did. Small, black, gold clasp. Classy enough to hold secrets. He drummed the arm of his chair. There it is. The fulcrum. Murder was not about gin, nor jealousy, nor dalliance with that oaf Harriman. It was about what she carried. Ergo, the handbag holds the key. I leaned back, folding my arms. That may be, but Kramer's not going to let me waltz in and search purses. He nearly bit my head off for breathing the same air as Lydia. Kramer is an irritant, Wolfe said flatly. But his bluster is useful. While he pursues the melodrama of poisoned gin, we shall pursue fact. I grinned. So we're in. The case is ours. He closed his eyes. It is foisted upon us. Reputation demands exoneration. We cannot be tethered to incompetence. Glad you see it as an opportunity. I do not. It is drudgery, and it will cost me 2 orchid hours and perhaps 3 bottles of beer. But yes, an opportunity. If solved swiftly, prestige may be restored, even enhanced. I got up and rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter. Want a list? Office workers, visitors, motives, neatly tabbed? Yes, dictate. I rattled the keys while he intoned like Caesar cataloguing Gauls. Harriman, reputation, possible embezzlement. Green, anxiety, potential weak link. Bellamy, ambition, perhaps involvement. Bristow, resentful, marginal utility. Clark's, gossip vectors. When he paused, I asked, And me? You, Archie, are the witness. Record nothing of your wit. Harsh, he sniffed. Editors, Archie, are parasites on prose. They mangle, they distort, they preen. Critics of cuisine, however, illuminate and refine. A sauce may be rescued by criticism. A sentence mangled by editors cannot. I grinned. That's a full-throated sermon against editors, considering one may be our killer. Exactly, Wolfe said, eyes gleaming. Vanity in publishing is no less than vanity in orchids. Hybrids bred not for beauty but for acclaim. Manuscripts forged not for truth but for profit. In both arenas, jealousy and theft are endemic. He leaned forward, surprising for him. The torn envelope, Archie. Retrieve it from the safe. I opened the safe, withdrew the evidence and placed it before him. He held it up to the window light, the watermark faint. Winfield's. Exclusive. Thus the killer's arrogance, threatening her with stationery traceable to their own citadel. Or, I said, Lydia wrote it herself, a red herring to sell you on her story. He frowned. You needle me. Yet, possible. We must not assume her innocence merely because she expired. The dead are capable of deceit through design. Yeah, I said, but poison is usually someone else's design. The clock struck 5. Wolfe sighed. Orchids again. I will not be disturbed until dinner. He rose, heavy as thunder, and moved toward the elevator. At the door he paused, eyes on me. Compile, Archie. Every detail, every gesture, every whisper of that office. Deception thrives in gaps. Close them. Will do, I said. But if you want my editorial review, our star witness is dead, her handbag is missing, and the police think we're pulling strings. My prediction? Things are about to get noisier than a poetry reading with free gin. He disappeared into the elevator cage, the door clanking shut. I sat down at the typewriter, fingers ready. Outside, Manhattan was lighting its neon fires against the dusk, but inside the brownstone, Wolfe's calculations had already begun. At 9:42 the next morning, I was climbing the narrow stairwell of a West Side walk-up, one of those respectable enough brownstones that had gone a little to seed, the kind landlords revarnished only when inspectors squawked. Marcus Bellamy's name was on the buzzer, written in a hurried scrawl, and the smell drifting down the stairwell was stale gin mixed with manuscript dust. Editors may live by words, but Bellamy's stairwell testified they died by cheap liquor. I rapped twice on the door. Shuffling, then the latch scraped and the man himself filled the crack. Tall, dark-haired, not bad-looking in a nervous way, but perspiration had already made his collar wilt. He tried to muster polish, but looked more like a kid waiting to be called on in Latin class. Mr. Goodwin? That's right. Nero Wolfe's ambassador extraordinary. May I? He stood aside. The place was modest, but packed to the rafters. Manuscripts spilled from every surface, some stacked neatly, others in teetering piles. 2 gin bottles, one empty, one half full, perched on a side table like honoured guests. The room had the sour tang of sleepless nights, ambition, and cheap floor polish. Excuse the mess, he said, wiping his hands on his trousers as if cleanliness could be conjured. Don't apologize. I've seen worse. I once visited a crime reporter's den that made this look like a monastery. You at least alphabetize your liquor. He gave a tight smile. "What can I do for you?" I settled into a battered armchair that had hosted too many late-night readings. "You can start by telling me why Lydia Vance is dead." The words hit him harder than gin. He flinched. I don't know. She was unstable. Everyone knew it. Maybe she took her own life." I raised an eyebrow. "With poison slipped into gin at her workplace, under the noses of half the publishing staff. That's one theatrical suicide." He swallowed. Beads of sweat rolled at his temple. "She was erratic. She had access to funds. I think she might have been embezzling." That was too smooth, too rehearsed. "Funny, that's the second time in 2 days I've been fed a line that tasted like it came from a typewriter ribbon. You rehearsed that too?" His jaw tightened. "I'm telling you what people thought." "Sure," I said. "And what did you think?" He fiddled with a sheaf of papers on his desk, shuffling them like they were cards in a game he couldn't win. A slip of foreign stationery poked out from under the pile, white, heavy stock, embossed with a small heraldic crest in the corner. Russian, if my hunch was right. It wasn't Harriman and Green's usual brand. I leaned forward, eyes on the crest. "You've got international taste in stationery." He froze, then pushed the pile over it. "Just research. Literary correspondence, nothing relevant." "Relevant to what? Lydia's interest in Nabokov? Or maybe the parody draft that wasn't parody?" His eyes widened. "She told you?" I smiled. "She told Wolfe. I just listen better than most." He licked his lips. She was fascinated by Russian writers, Nabokov especially. She read everything of his she could find. We argued about it just last week. She said his new novel was genius. I said it was pretentious. "And you lived to tell the tale." He gave a nervous laugh. She was passionate, but dangerous. She poked into matters that didn't concern her. I leaned back, letting the chair creak. "Like embezzling? Or like discovering her employers were laundering money through manuscripts?" His eyes darted. He wiped his forehead. "I don't know anything about that. But I do know she was close to Green. Too close. People noticed." There it was, a red herring served with trembling hands. "Green, not Harriman?" I asked. "That's a new one. Yesterday the gossip grapevine had her with Harriman." He shook his head fiercely. No, Green, always Green." She lingered in his office, whispered with him. It was obvious. I filed it. Too emphatic, too eager. Either he believed it or wanted me to. I stood, brushed imaginary dust from my sleeve. "All right, Mr. Bellamy. You've been helpful in a clammy sort of way, but if you'll excuse me, Wolfe has orchids waiting. He likes his facts as neat as Fritz's custards, and right now yours look like bad proofreading." Bellamy followed me to the door, pale and sweating. You won't tell them about the stationery?" I paused in the hall, hat in hand. "Depends. If it's nothing, I won't waste Wolfe's time. If it's something, he'll know before dinner. Either way, I'd start filing your conscience, Mr. Bellamy. It's sticking out of your drawer." I left him there, door half shut, his face caught between defiance and fear. Back on the street, neon signs blinked against the morning drizzle, and typewriter clatter from open windows reminded me that New York's publishing world never slept. It just sweated and schemed. I hailed a cab, already rehearsing the report Wolfe would demand. Bellamy sweating, Bellamy lying, Bellamy sitting on Russian stationery like it was a hand grenade, and Wolfe, fat and immovable, would read it like scripture and decide who in the House of Words had turned murder into punctuation. At 9:08 that night, the rain was playing timpani on the brownstone windows, steady and sharp, when the bell clanged with the kind of fury that means Inspector Kramer. Fritz wouldn't touch it, so I went, and sure enough, there he was, hat dripping, cigar clamped like it was the only thing keeping his jaw from unhinging, and eyes red enough to qualify as semaphore. Behind him lurked Pearlie Stebbins, bulldog shoulders hunched, looking eager to bite something, preferably me. "Goodwin," Kramer barked. "Out of the way." He pushed in like the storm had deputized him, and Pearlie shut the door behind with enough force to rattle Fritz's framed alpine prints. "Evening, Inspector," I said sweetly. "We were just wondering whether to make cocoa or call the fire department. You've settled it. Cocoa." He grunted, stomped into the office, and there was Wolfe, already enthroned, as if he'd been waiting for his inquisitors since the Magna Carta. Wolfe didn't rise, didn't blink, just lifted one hand. "Inspector, be seated, if you can restrain yourself." Kramer ignored the chair. He slammed a folded document on Wolfe's desk. "That's a draft warrant. The DA's office is tired of you playing priest while people drop dead. I want Lydia Vance's client file, notes, statements, every scrap she gave you." Wolfe regarded the paper as if it were a grocery list. "A draft warrant," he said slowly. "Not signed, not valid, not enforceable. Fui." Kramer's face turned the shade of his cigar ash. "She's dead, Wolfe, poisoned in a room full of publishers, and she sat in this chair right here before she died. You're concealing evidence." Wolfe closed his eyes. "I conceal nothing. I preserve confidences. Until you present competent authority, my safe remains inviolate." That word, inviolate, nearly gave Kramer apoplexy. He swung on me. "And you, Goodwin, what lies are you scribbling for him this time?" I spread my hands. "Only the truth, Inspector." I typed up her words, filed them neat, and watched her walk out alive. "If you want fiction, you'll have to check the manuscripts at Harriman and Green." Pearlie growled. "You think this is funny, Goodwin?" "I think it's tragic," I said. "But you might as well laugh as cry, considering how much gin was wasted." That earned me a glare. Wolfe tugged the bell cord, and Fritz appeared silently with a tray of beer in chilled glasses. He set one by Wolfe, ignored Kramer, and vanished like smoke. Wolfe lifted his glass with ceremony. "Inspector, beer?" Kramer slapped the desk. "Damn your beer! She was poisoned. Toxicology came back. Bitter almond traces in the gin glass. That means cyanide. Not an accident, not carelessness, murder." That changed the temperature in the room. Even Wolfe's eyes opened. "Indeed," he murmured. Then Lydia Vance was silenced, not careless. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" "Note it. Cyanide, gin glass, faint traces." I rolled a sheet into the typewriter, keys clacking, filed under reasons to avoid gin. Kramer's fury flared. "This isn't a parlor game, Wolfe. A young woman is dead, and your client privilege won't shield you when the DA signs this warrant. You'll cough up those files or I'll drag you down to Center Street." Wolfe took a long drink, set the glass down and sighed. "You bluster, Inspector. It ill becomes you. Your wrath blinds you to your own duty. You have a poisoned woman, a missing handbag, a firm riddled with vanity. Pursue those facts, not me." Kramer leaned close, cigar smoke mixing with the rain-scented air. "I know you've got something. You always have something. And when I find it first, Wolfe, I'll make sure the press knows you sat on it." "Lon Cohen will print what he deems fit," Wolfe said calmly. "And he knows my reputation for precision exceeds your reputation for volume." I bit my tongue to keep from grinning. Wolfe's calm against Kramer's thunder was like watching a cathedral shrug at a hailstorm. Kramer snatched back the draft warrant. "Fine. Sit on your fat dignity. But when the DA calls, don't expect me to knock politely, and don't expect me to keep Stebbins from dragging that safe into the truck." Pearlie cracked his knuckles, clearly enjoying the picture. Wolfe leaned back, folded his hands. "Inspector, when you possess lawful authority, I will comply. Until then, I bid you good evening." Kramer swore, something creative, and stomped out, Pearlie on his heels. The door shook behind them. The silence afterward was thick enough to spread on bread. Wolfe lifted his beer again, eyes closed in satisfaction. "Archie," he said, "summarize for the record. Inspector Kramer, storming, demanding, failing, departing." I typed it up, margin neat. Then I swiveled in my chair. "You realize, don't you, that by refusing him you've just guaranteed he'll come back with half the precinct and a crowbar?" "Fui," Wolfe said. "He cannot pry with law what he cannot fathom with reason." "Yeah," I said, "but he can sure make a racket trying." Wolfe drained his glass, set it down and closed his eyes. The rain tapped the windows, steady as a typewriter key, and the word cyanide hung in the air, spelling murder clearer than any manuscript ever could. At 10:52 the next morning the office phone rang, which was already a problem. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids and would remain there until 11 sharp. Disturbing him before orchid hour ends is like tapping a bull on the horns to check if it's sharp. I took the call. "Goodwin," a voice said, low and calm. Saul Panzer never wasted syllables. I was hoping it was the liquor store, I told him, but I'll take you. I've got something. You want it in person? When? Now. Collector's Place, uptown. Russian literature. You'll see why. I glanced at the clock. 10:54. Make it quick. If Wolfe hears I left without filing my morning wisecracks, I'll get docked. Saul chuckled faintly, the closest he gets to a belly laugh, and gave me an address on East 79th. By 11:30 I was there. The rain had cleared, but left the streets shining like wet newsprint. The building was quiet wealth, limestone facade, discreet doorman, no names on the buzzer. Saul met me in the lobby, flat cap pulled low. Collectors upstairs, he murmured. Name's Voronov, old émigré, buys anything Russian, especially manuscripts. Someone offered him one last night, said it was Nabokov, early work. He let me see it. I whistled. That's rare air. Nabokov before Lolita is like a dress rehearsal no one's supposed to see. Saul shrugged. Except this isn't rehearsal. It's counterfeit. We went up. Voronov's library looked like Tolstoy had exploded in it. Walls stacked with leather-bound tomes, heavy drapes, the smell of pipe smoke clinging to the rugs. The man himself was small, grey-bearded, polite and watchful. He offered me tea in a samovar big enough to drown a cat. You are with Mr. Wolfe. His accent was precise. His eyes and ears, I said, mostly ears. He nodded and handed me a sheaf bound in plain cardboard. This was offered to me, supposedly Nabokov. Look. I looked. The prose was florid, dancing from English to Russian with the confidence of someone who'd lived in both. But something itched. In the margins were numbers, faintly penciled, irregular, and once you saw them, you noticed more, odd phrases repeating at intervals. The green lamp, twice the man, Archie knew. I stiffened. Saul leaned over. Ledger entries, coded, kickbacks, amounts, dates, you see it. I did. The manuscript wasn't art. It was arithmetic disguised as prose. Someone at Harriman and Green had gone full-bore creative accountant. Voronov's eyes twinkled. Not Nabokov. Too clumsy, but clever, yes? Clever like a forger with rent due, I said. I passed it back. Who offered this to you? Voronov spread his hands. An intermediary, young, sweated too much, did not leave a name. Bellamy, I asked Saul. Could be, could also be a red herring. Voronov looked offended at the fish metaphor, but kept quiet. We left the library with nothing but the memory of that counterfeit manuscript. Saul and I walked 2 blocks before I spoke. Wolfe's going to eat this up. A fake Nabokov hiding payoffs? That's cuisine for his brain. Saul nodded. But watch it. Someone may argue Lydia forged it herself, to blackmail the firm. I grimaced. Yeah, makes a tidy red herring. The dead girl always makes a good scapegoat. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, orchid hour over. I handed him my notes, Saul sitting quietly like an obedient shadow. Wolfe examined the scribbles, nostrils flaring. A forgery. Nabokov imitated. Ledger entries hidden in pretentious phrasing. Phooey. Only the vain would choose such camouflage. Saul added, Voronov swears it's counterfeit. He's right. Wolfe tapped a finger on the desk. Then our problem is not only murder, it is forgery. Who forged, who delivered, who profited? I said, or whether Lydia herself cooked it up to squeeze her bosses. Wolfe's eyes snapped open. Nonsense. Her fear was genuine. I smelled no craft in her terror. Do not let Kramer feed you that bone. But you'll admit it makes a handy red herring, I said. Yes, Wolfe allowed, and a dangerous one. The room settled into silence. Fritz arrived with a tray of sandwiches, ham and mustard, cut square. He set them down and left without a word. Wolfe reached, took one, and bit with grim concentration. This manuscript, he said finally, is no longer literature. It is evidence. It tells us Harriman and Green was not merely publishing. They were laundering. The forgery exposes them, but it also shields the killer. I leaned back, chewing my own sandwich. Which means someone's willing to kill to keep the words from being read. Words they wrote themselves. Wolfe raised his brows. A grim paradox. Literature as disguise for greed. Saul stood, flat cap in hand. You'll want me to keep digging. Yes, Wolfe said, quietly. Follow the manuscript's trail. Who copied it, who offered it, who profits. Spare no step. Saul nodded once and left as silently as he'd come. Wolfe closed his eyes, savouring his beer. Archie, file this under manuscript false, summarise precisely, then type a memorandum for myself to be reviewed at dinner. I rolled paper into the machine and started hammering. Duplicate manuscript surfaced. Forged Nabokov. Margins coded. Dates, amounts, kickbacks. Offered to Voronov, Russian collector. Seller unknown, sweated excessively. Suspicion, Bellamy. Red herring, Lydia as forger. When I finished, Wolfe was already leaning back, fingers steepled, eyes shut. The clock chimed 1. He sighed. Lunch. And just like that, the session ended. Murder, forgery, blackmail, all postponed for Fritz's veal and a slice of apple strudel. Dinner at the Brownstone is not a meal, it's an institution, with rituals older than some republics. At precisely 8 o'clock, Fritz unveiled his veal roast, a masterpiece glazed and garnished within an inch of its life, while Wolfe presided at the head of the mahogany table like Jupiter before the thunderbolts. The room glowed with candlelight, silver polished enough to blind a bishop, and curtains drawn tight against the rain-slick Manhattan night. Outside, murder was loose among publishers. Inside, the air carried thyme, veal, and Wolfe's contented grunt. For me, food is fuel. For Wolfe, food is gospel. Which meant I had to pick my moment to bring up Lydia Vance and cyanide. I chose just after the second helping, when his defences were temporarily down. Today's highlights, I said, carving into my slice, include a counterfeit Nabokov, hiding a ledger, Bellamy sweating like a horse in July, and Kramer threatening to rip your safe out of the wall. But you'll be cheered to know the veal outlived them all. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Archie, do not sully Fritz's artistry with homicide. Too late. Murder's seasoning the stew whether you taste it or not. He sighed, heavy enough to rust the candelabra. Very well. Your levity is execrable, but proceed. So I gave him the recap. Bellamy's nervousness, the Russian stationery with the crest, Saul's discovery of the forged manuscript, Voronov's twinkling beard. Wolfe listened with the patience of a man measuring sources, chewing slowly, occasionally grunting. When I finished, he dabbed his lips with the linen napkin. So, a manuscript that is not Nabokov, yet mimics him, margins encoding illicit payments, and Miss Vance, terrified, perhaps in possession of the original pages. Phooey, publishing Archie is a cesspool dressed in tweed. I raised my glass of milk. Cheers to cesspools. But what if she wasn't bluffing? What if she really had the goods? His eyes flicked open. She was truthful. Fear rarely lies. Yet it is possible she did not comprehend what she carried. She may have been a mule. I frowned. Mule? Yes. A courier unaware of the cargo's value. Her handbag. You remarked it was missing from the crime scene. Ergo, she transported the incriminating manuscript, unknowingly or unwillingly, and was killed for it. That chilled more than the rain on the window. So someone slipped it in her bag, intending her to deliver it, and when she discovered the truth, she became inconvenient, Wolfe finished. He speared a slice of veal with more venom than necessary. In literature, Archie, falsehood parades as genius. In cuisine, falsehood parades as adulteration. Both are insults to art. A sauce thickened with flour instead of reduction is kin to a sentence padded with pretension. Miss Vance was entangled in a forgery both culinary and criminal. I grinned. And the killer's a bad cook and a worse writer. We're narrowing the field, he glared. Do not jest. This is grave. We are opposed not only by greed but by vanity. Vanity kills. I leaned back, fork idle. Then explain one thing. If Lydia was a mule, who packed the saddlebags? Harriman, Green, Bellamy, or the corpse of Bristow's career? Not Bristow, Wolfe said flatly. He is a husk. The vigour required is lacking. Bellamy is ambitious but sloppy. Green is nervous, which may conceal guilt. Harriman, portly, smug, is capable of arrogance sufficient to attempt such disguise. We shall see. I let that hang. Fritz cleared plates, silent as snowfall, and returned with apple strudel steaming, dusted with sugar. Wolfe's lips softened. Strudel was his truce. As he ate, I prodded again. You're convinced she didn't forge it herself? That's the line Bellamy's pushing. He set down his fork with finality. Phooey. Miss Vance lacked the erudition to counterfeit Nabokov. She might parody a parody but not embed ledgers. That is the work of an editor, or a publisher with resources. Do not insult my intelligence. Hey, I'm just the errand boy, I said. But I'll note, if Bellamy's sweating so much, maybe it's because he knows the code by heart. Perhaps, Wolfe allowed. He sipped beer, savouring. Yet sweat does not prove guilt. It proves only perspiration. The clock chimed 8:30. Wolfe wiped his hands and pushed back. Archie, file this dinner memorandum. Title, The Mule Hypothesis. Summarize, handbag missing, manuscript concealed, Miss Vance as unwitting courier. I sighed. You make paperwork part of dessert. Discipline is dessert, Wolfe retorted. I rose, went to the typewriter in the office and began hammering. Dinner memorandum, 8:22 p.m. Wolfe proposes Miss Vance acted as mule. Handbag missing at crime scene. Manuscript likely concealed therein. Manuscript forgery likened to adulterated cuisine. Suspects: Harriman, arrogant; Green, nervous; Bellamy, ambitious, sloppy. Bristow eliminated by decrepitude. I pulled it free, placed it in the safe, and returned to find Wolfe sipping the last of his beer. Archie, he said, truth is like cuisine. It must be pure. Adulteration betrays both the palate and the mind. We shall find who has adulterated both, if the fulcrum appears. I raise my glass of milk. Fine, but if you compare murder to mayonnaise again, I'm quitting. Wolfe shut his eyes, fingers steepled, the world dismissed. Dinner was over, casework postponed. The orchids would have him at 9 sharp. I looked out the window at the dripping street lamps and thought about Lydia's missing handbag, a mule carrying death in the shape of Russian prose. Whoever wrote the code had just earned a seat at Wolfe's table, whether they liked veal roast or not. At 7:46 the following evening I was nursing a glass of milk in Wolfe's office and contemplating the odds that Bellamy would sweat himself into a puddle when the phone rang. Wolfe had just started his beer, first of the evening, in a glass frosted by Fritz's perfectionist touch, so naturally I was the one who had to answer. "Goodwin," I said. The voice at the other end was Lon Cohen of the Gazette, and it carried the kind of excitement that sells papers in bold type. "Archie, get this. You sitting down?" "I make it a practice," I said. "Hit me." Green, the partner at Harriman and Green, dead, hanged in his office. Cops found him an hour ago. That straightened me in the chair. Suicide? That's the ticket Kramer's punching. Desk note said something about shame, scandal, couldn't face exposure. They'll have it in the morning edition. Want me to save you a copy? Save me 3. Wolfe will want one to sneer at, one to annotate, and one to tear in half. Thanks, Lon. I hung up, turned, and gave Wolfe the news. He set down his beer with exaggerated care. Archie, repeat. Green's dead, hanged in his office. Note left behind. Kramer's buying the suicide special. Wolfe closed his eyes, groaned. Phooey. Men rarely select rope when poison has already demonstrated its efficacy. This is murder masquerading as despair. Sure, I said. But Kramer will want to wrap it with ribbon and call it solved. Nice and tidy. Partner guilty, kills himself, case closed. The doorbell rang at 8:03. Fritz wouldn't touch it, so I went. And there was Kramer, dripping rain and fury again, with Stebbins hulking behind. I ushered them in with all the ceremony of a mortician greeting new business. Inside, Kramer didn't bother to sit. He puffed his cigar like a locomotive and barked. "You heard?" "We heard," Wolfe said, imperious as ever. "And we dismiss." Kramer growled. "Dismiss what?" Green strung himself up with his own necktie. Note on the desk, clear as day. He confessed. Embezzlement, shame, fear of exposure. Case closed. "Phooey," Wolfe thundered. "Confession notes are the laziest contrivance. Who profits from Green's death?" "Green profited by ending his misery," Kramer snapped. I cut in. "Inspector, I've seen men hang themselves. Chairs kicked away, rope marks clean. But you're telling me Green, a man who could barely knot a tie straight, managed to rig a noose like a sailor and stage it in his mahogany office?" Stebbins barked. "You calling me blind, Goodwin?" "No, Pearlie," I said sweetly. "I'm calling you observant enough to notice the rope fibers on his jacket don't match a fool. You did notice, right?" His face went red. He looked at Kramer. There were details, Kramer grunted. Chair was in the wrong spot. Rope fibers off. Maybe somebody helped him along, but that note... Forged, Wolfe said. I do not need to see it. A man of Green's nervous constitution would leave blotted ink and hesitation, not a neat confession. Someone drafted it. Someone staged him. Kramer glared. You talk like you were there. I talk like I think, Wolfe replied. You should try it. That almost brought Kramer's cigar down Wolfe's throat, but I slid in. Inspector, what if Green was about to crack, about to spill? Lydia's death rattled him, so he knew he was next. Someone made sure he was. Kramer puffed, grumbled. Or maybe he did it. You two always want the complicated answer. Because murderers prefer complicated, Wolfe said. Kramer jabbed the cigar at me. You'll get me a list. Everyone Green saw today. Every call. Every visitor. If you sit on anything, Wolfe, I'll drag you down to Center Street and watch you sweat. Phooey, Wolfe said again, but softer, which meant he was interested. Kramer stormed out with Stebbins in tow. The door shook again in their wake. I returned to Wolfe. So Green's death is Act 2. What's the script? He lifted his beer. The motif, Archie, is reputation. Harriman and Green was crumbling. Lydia threatened exposure. Green was weak. Someone wrote his exit as though writing a bad play. Melodramatic, implausible, staged. We must discover the playwright. I nodded. So, we follow the props. Rope fibers, chair placement, forged note, and we ask who benefits from Green's curtain call. Precisely, Wolfe said, eyes half shut. Record it. I rolled paper into the typewriter and hammered. Green found hanged, office, apparent suicide. Desk note confession, likely forged. Rope fibers inconsistent, chair misplaced. Wolfe asserts murder disguised as despair. Motif, reputation destroyed, staged like poor drama. When I finished, Wolfe drained his glass and Fritz appeared with the tray, cheese, crackers, the calm after storm. Wolfe selected a wedge, sniffed and bit. Archie, he said, truth requires refinement. This crude staging is forgery. We will unmask it. Fine, I said, pouring myself milk. But if we're characters in a bad play, Inspector Kramer's chewing the scenery. Wolfe closed his eyes. Silence. The rain tapped harder at the windows, as though Manhattan itself applauded the next act of murder. At 9:15 the following night I was leaning against the bar at the Starlight Lounge, one of those penthouse watering holes where the drinks are as overpriced as the clientele's pearls. Neon bled through the panoramic windows, splashing the skyline in hot pink and blue, and a piano crooned something mournful in the corner. If Harriman and Green was ink and sweat, this place was sequins and martinis. She arrived exactly as Saul Panzer's discreet note had promised. Vivian Hale, heiress, investor, and walking advertisement for what happens when money and self-confidence meet in a powder room. She wore a black satin gown that shimmered like wet ink, diamonds at her throat, and an expression that mixed hauteur with panic, the kind of panic that tries to wear lipstick. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, voice smooth but pitched too high. "That's me," I said, pulling out a chair. "Nero Wolfe's errand boy, here to see what money looks like when it's nervous." Her smile was brittle. She sat, waved for a cocktail and leaned in. I don't usually involve myself in business details, but Lydia, she told me something before she died. I nodded. Let me guess, that Harriman and Green was cooking books instead of manuscripts. She blinked. You know? I've been tripping over clues all week. Try me. She sipped her drink. Lydia said the firm was laundering funds through manuscript sales that never existed. I have significant money invested. If the scandal breaks, I'm ruined. There it was, the glamour stripped to desperation. You'll forgive me, Miss Hale, but you don't strike me as someone who pawns tiaras when the market dips, she bristled. It's more than money. It's reputation. In my circles, a name is currency. If Harriman and Green falls, my name falls with it. I watched her over my milk. Yes, they stocked it, though the bartender looked ready to resign. So, Lydia was ready to blow the whistle. And now she's dead. Green's dead too, hung like a marionette in his office. You're worried the string puller will cut you next. Her eyes darted to the window, the skyline glittering like a million judgmental eyes. Yes, Lydia mentioned something she carried. A notebook, green leather, small enough for her purse. She said it contained fragments. Proof. That perked me. A small green notebook, I repeated. Handbag-sized. She nodded. She clutched it when we last spoke, said if anything happened to her it would tell the truth, but I've heard nothing since. I leaned back, letting the neon catch her diamonds. Inspector Kramer will love this. He thinks Lydia was just a hysterical girl, but you're saying she had hard evidence. Her mouth tightened. Don't tell him. Please. The police don't care about reputations, they crush them. I grinned. You've got me there. Kramer crushes everything, especially my patients. But Wolfe likes facts. He'll want that notebook more than Fritz wants veal. She reached across the table, nails flashing. Then find it, before it's too late. I caught her hand, gently removed it. Careful, you'll wrinkle my suit. She laughed, too loudly, then stopped. The act was slipping. Underneath the satin was a woman terrified she'd backed the wrong horse. I stood, dropped a bill on the table and tipped my hat. I'll tell Wolfe you said hello, and I'll tell him about the notebook. If it exists, he'll find it. If it doesn't, then the killer just gave us a reason to prove it never did. Her eyes followed me as I left, wide and pleading, diamonds trembling at her throat. Back in the cab, the city's neon smeared across the windshield like spilled ink, a green leather notebook. If Lydia had clutched it, and it was gone at the archives, then somebody had taken it with more than manicured fingers. When I reached the brownstone at 10:42, Wolfe was in his chair, Fritz standing by with the evening tray. I reported Vivian Hale in full, gown, diamonds, panic, and the notebook. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Ah, wealth entwined with vanity, a patron ruined by scandal. This motif grows tiresome. Maybe, I said, but green leather notebooks don't grow on trees. He grunted, reached for his beer and said, Archie, record it. Then we shall see who writes the final chapter. And with that, dinner's leftovers and murder's next course sat side by side in Wolfe's office, waiting for midnight to decide which was more indigestible. At 10:12 the next morning, the brownstone was as calm as a monastery. Fritz had retreated upstairs to commune with his pantry. Theodore Horstmann was no doubt coaxing the orchids into their 4 o'clock encore, and Wolfe was deep in his chair, eyes closed, hands folded on the equator of his stomach. Peace, in other words, until I opened my mouth. I had typed up the memorandum on Vivian Hale, heiress, investor, panic in satin, and the mysterious green notebook, but Wolfe hadn't yet commented. When Nero Wolfe goes silent, it's either digestion or fury, and since Fritz's veal hadn't been served in 12 hours, I was betting on the latter. I cleared my throat. So, boss, the way I see it, we've got 3 suspects with good motives, no notebook, and 2 bodies. What we need is less poi and more proof. His eyes opened, dark as ink wells. Archie. Yes, sir. I will not abide insult. Vivian Hale conceals her intent behind wealth. Bellamy conceals incompetence behind sweat. Harriman conceals arrogance behind portliness. All deceive, all insult me. That was Wolfe in a nutshell. Cross him, and you weren't just guilty of lying, you were guilty of blasphemy. Sure, I said, but if you're going to fire all the clients, you'll be left with me, Fritz, and the orchids. Fritz can't pay, I'm broke, and the orchids don't sign checks. He sat forward, which for Wolfe was equivalent to another man leaping onto a table. Archie, understand me. I will abandon this case. Fui on them all. I will not pursue truth when deception festers in every mouth. That fui rattled the window glass. I grinned. So, that's it? You're quitting? Going to retire to Montenegrin poetry while Bellamy sweats himself into an ulcer, Harriman counts counterfeit rubles, and Lydia's killer plays Nabokov with rope and cyanide? His nostrils flared. Do not taunt me, Archie. I wouldn't dream, I said sweetly. But the case does involve Nabokov, and I'd bet 2 quarts of milk you won't walk away from that. Too rare, too curious. A forgery hidden in prose, vanity masquerading as genius. You live for that. Admit it. Wolfe slammed his palm on the desk. Phooey! I let the silence stretch. When Wolfe thunders twice in one sitting, you give him the space to enjoy his own echo. Finally, he breathed deep. Archie, I have rules. Integrity must govern inquiry. When clients deceive, my labour is wasted. Miss Hale concealed, Bellamy dissembled, Harriman postures. I will not be their lackey. I leaned back, laced my hands behind my head. Fine. Withdraw. Let Kramer mop it up. He'll chalk it as suicide and gin, print neat headlines, and never notice the missing handbag or green notebook. You'll be free to spend your afternoons with orchids, your evenings with Fritz's soufflés, and your nights correcting my commas. Only catch is, your reputation gets stapled to the words, Nero Wolfe quits. That hit. Wolfe loathes quitting the way Fritz loathes margarine. His lips pressed into a line that could cut granite. Archie, he said, low and formal, record this. I will proceed only if the missing handbag and the green leather notebook are retrieved. They are the fulcrum. Without them, the lever breaks. I rolled paper into the typewriter and started hammering. Statement of Nero Wolfe, 10:28 a.m. Threatened withdrawal. Denounced Hale, Bellamy, Harriman for deception. Declares continuation contingent upon retrieval of missing handbag and green leather notebook. Case integrity otherwise compromised. Phooey. I tore it out, set it on his blotter. He read it, sighed. So be it. The handbag and notebook. Without them, nothing. Good, I said. Now we've got ourselves an Easter egg hunt. Only someone already cracked it open. His eyes closed again, and I knew he was done, but the storm was still rattling the room. By early afternoon, I was perched at my desk, sorting Wolfe's dictation from the morning, routine letters, invoices, and one magnificent insult to a wine merchant who had dared suggest Alsace Riesling could be considered adequate. Wolfe had dictated with more venom than usual, which meant his brain was still chewing on Vivian Hale's satin lies. I tapped a key, muttered, "If lies were calories, you'd be a beast by proxy," and kept typing. At 2:05 the phone rang. Wolfe waved, eyes closed. I answered. "Goodwin." The voice was Saul Pantzer's. "Archie. Something. A woman matching Lydia's build was seen near the East River docks 2 nights ago, carrying a green notebook. Witness says she passed it to a man. Thin, grey suit, spectacles." I scribbled it down. "You sure it wasn't Lydia herself?" Witness swears it was. Timeline fits. Before her death. I whistled. "So, she passed the notebook off to who?" "Working on it. Might have been Bristow's errand boy, or someone from Green's Circle." I thanked him, hung up, and reported. Wolfe opened his eyes. "A transfer," he said grimly. "Then the handbag was decoy. The notebook lives elsewhere." He leaned forward again, twice in one day, which meant danger or indigestion. "Archie, this strengthens my condition. We must retrieve it. Only then will we proceed." I said, "If you keep threatening to quit, one day I'll call your bluff." He glared. "Do so, and you will find yourself unemployed and me undisturbed. Do not trifle, Archie." I grinned. "But then who would type your insults?" That earned me silence, which was victory enough. At 4 o'clock, Wolfe lumbered off to his orchids, and I was left with my milk and my thoughts. The office was dim, shadows slanting across the bookshelves, rain starting up again on the glass. I thought about Lydia, her frightened voice, her handbag clutched, her life ended in gin and poison. Then Green, swinging like a badly written curtain call, and Vivian Hale, clutching her diamonds like rosary beads. Wolfe might withdraw, but I couldn't. Maybe I was sentimental, maybe I just hated bad endings. But the truth was hiding in a notebook no bigger than my hand, bound in green leather, and someone was willing to kill twice to keep it shut. At 6:02 Wolfe returned, refreshed from orchids, smelling faintly of damp earth and pride. He sat, rang for Fritz, and received a tray of cheese and crackers. He bit, chewed, and finally said, "Archie, if the notebook is in our possession by morning, we will interview Harriman. Then we shall see." I raised my glass. "Sure, but remember, you promised only if the notebook appears." He grunted. "Pfui, do not remind me of my own words." "Gladly," I said, "but until the handbag shows up, I'll keep the typewriter warm and the milk cold." He closed his eyes again, satisfied, while outside the rain hissed down Broadway like a city trying to wash away its sins, and I knew the case wasn't dead, not while Wolfe's pride was alive, and not while Lydia's notebook was still missing. At 11:06 the next morning, I was balancing a glass of milk in one hand and Wolfe's fresh dictation in the other, when the phone rang. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, of course. Orchid hour is inviolate, same as the 10 Commandments. so it fell to me. "Goodwin," I said. "Saul," came the reply. 3 letters, clipped, steady. "When Saul Panzer calls, you know the news is solid." "I've got it," he said. I straightened. "The handbag?" "Yes, Lower East Side, pawn shop on Delancey. Shopkeeper says it came in late 2 nights ago." I watched, waited, items still there. That jolted me better than caffeine. "The real McCoy, Lydia's?" "Women's leather, green lining, initials faint inside, LV, contents mostly gone, but there's a notebook." I whistled. "You're a prince, Saul. Sit tight, I'll get there." At 11:10, I scrawled a quick note for Wolfe. "Saul located Lydia's handbag, Delancey pawn. Reports a green notebook inside. Fetching now. Orchids remain undisturbed." Then hustled out before the orchids could claim him for another half hour. The Lower East Side in rain is a different New York. Uptown it's polished stone and penthouse glass. Down here it's wet cobblestones, fish markets, and neon blinking over pawn shops like dying fireflies. The cab dropped me at a narrow storefront with iron grates and a sign that once said loans, but now mostly said rust. Inside, the shop smelled of damp cloth and stale cigars. A row of violins leaned against typewriters, and watches dangled like fruit from hooks. Behind the counter perched the proprietor, a wiry man with grey stubble and an expression that said he'd seen it all and sold it twice. "You're Goodwin?" he asked when I gave my name. Saul must have prepped him. "That's right, you're holding a lady's handbag for me." He ducked under the counter, rummaged, and came up with a faded leather purse, once elegant, now battered. The initials LV glimmered faintly. My pulse ticked. "Contents?" I asked. "Some trinkets, lipstick, coins, and this." He produced a slim green notebook, scuffed, edges worn. I flipped it open. Half the pages had been torn out cleanly. The remaining entries were coded columns of numbers, cross-hatched with odd phrases. Green lamp, twice the man. Payout arranged. One line made me stop cold. Payment delivered to the man who knew Archie twice. I reread it 3 times. Either it was a joke, or somebody out there had a sense of humour cruel enough to use me as shorthand in a murder ledger. I snapped it shut. "How much?" The proprietor named a figure inflated enough to buy him a week in the Catskills. I peeled off bills more than Fritz spends in a month, and tucked notebook and handbag under my arm. "Word of advice," the man said. "Objects tell stories. Sometimes the stories bite back." I gave him a grin. "Thanks. If this one bites, I'll send it back to you." Outside, neon sputtered in the drizzle. I hailed a cab, notebook burning against my ribs. At 1 o'clock sharp, lunch was served, veal with mushrooms, Fritz's artistry, but I ate fast, ignoring Wolfe's disapproving glare. When plates cleared, I produced the prize. "The prodigal handbag," I said, placing it on his desk like a sacrament. Wolfe leaned forward, nostrils flaring. "At last." I opened the notebook, slid it across. He adjusted his glasses, read slowly, lips tightening. "Pages missing," he muttered. "Of course, but enough remains." His finger tapped the fatal line. "The man who knew Archie twice. Explain." "I'd love to," I said. "But unless I've got a double walking around town, I'm stumped. Who in publishing knew me twice?" "You are immodest," Wolfe said. "It may not be literal. It may mean acquaintance or recognition. Someone linked to you, twice over." "Which still makes me bait," I said. He closed the notebook, eyes glinting. "Precisely. The killer taunts us. You, Archie, are entangled. The phrase is ambiguous by design. It could mock you or mask a name. We will keep both readings until conduct narrows it." That sent a chill down my back, though I covered it with a wisecrack. Well, at least they didn't write "the man who drank milk." That would have narrowed it. Wolfe ignored me. He rang the bell cord. Fritz appeared with coffee, poured, and vanished. Wolfe sipped, then said, "Archie, file this. Title, The Handbag Recovered. Detail all. Note especially the cryptic phrase." I rolled paper into the typewriter and began hammering. Recovered Lydia Vance's handbag, pawn shop, Delancey Street. Inside, green notebook, half torn. Ledger entries coded. Crucial line, payout arranged through the man who knew Archie twice. Significance uncertain. Clue implies personal link. I finished, locked notebook and handbag in the safe, and turned. Wolfe was staring into the middle distance, mind working like a clock with too many gears. Finally he said, "Archie, this fulcrum will lift the case, or crush it. Tomorrow, bring Bellamy and Harriman here. Tonight, you will not wander. Someone may wish to erase the man who is named." I grinned, though my stomach wasn't in on the joke. Sure, I'll stay put. Safer that way. But I couldn't shake the image of Lydia clutching that same notebook and the ledger mocking me by name. Somewhere out there, the killer knew me well enough to write me into their playbill twice, and Wolfe, for all his thunder, had just set the stage for the final act. At 7:58 that evening, the brownstone felt less like home and more like a courthouse waiting for its judge to enter. Wolfe was in his chair, vast and immovable, eyes half closed as though the weight of the entire publishing world rested on his stomach, which, in a way, it did. I'd spent the afternoon transforming his office into a theatre. Chairs had been arranged with military precision. Harriman on the left, Vivian Hale on the right, Bellamy square in the middle, and a chair near the window reserved for Kramer. I'd polished the walnut desk until it could blind a man under Fritz's chandelier light, and the orchids upstairs contributed their faint perfume through the open transom. Fritz himself was hovering near the kitchen with beer chilling like ammunition. At 8:02 the bell rang. Fritz wouldn't touch it, so I did. Harriman was first, portly, smug, smelling faintly of cognac and cigars. He strutted into the office like it was a shareholders' meeting, then frowned when he realized Wolfe wasn't standing to greet him. "Mr. Wolfe," Harriman said, "I resent being summoned at night like a clerk." "Phooey," Wolfe muttered without opening his eyes. "Sit." Harriman sat, a front dripping from his moustache. At 8:05 Bellamy arrived, hat in hand, forehead already glistening. He looked like a man who'd practiced lies in the mirror and forgotten the script. "Evening," he croaked. "Chair," Wolfe said. Bellamy obeyed. At 8:10 Vivian Hale swept in, satin and diamonds, perfume heavy enough to strangle honesty. She looked at the assembled company with the disdain of a duchess forced to share a trolley. "I came," she announced, "because Mr. Wolfe promised clarity." "Sit," Wolfe said again. She did, crossing legs with a flash calculated to remind everyone she was used to better company. At 8:13 the bell clanged like Judgment Day. I opened the door to Kramer, cigar already smoking, Stebbins hulking behind him like thunderclouds. "Goodwin," Kramer barked, "if this is another of Wolfe's vaudeville shows, I'll haul the lot of you downtown." "Then at least we'll get out of the rain," I said sweetly. "Come in, Inspector. Your seat's waiting." He stormed past, filled the room with cigar smoke, and dropped into his chair like it owed him rent. Stebbins stood at the wall, arms folded, bulldog eyes on everyone. Wolfe opened his eyes at last. He surveyed the group with slow, imperial calm. "We are met," he intoned, "because a woman is dead. 2 women, if we count reputations. Lydia Vance murdered. Green, staged as suicide. Both victims of deceit born in the offices of Harriman and Green." Harriman puffed. "Baseless." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin." That was my cue. I stepped forward with Lydia's handbag in one hand and the green notebook in the other. Gasps from Vivian, a twitch from Bellamy, and a frown deep enough to cut stone from Harriman. "This," I said, "is Lydia's missing handbag, found in a Delancey pawn shop, and this notebook, what's left of it, lists payouts disguised in parody. Half its pages torn, but one line remains. Payment delivered to the man who knew Archie twice." Kramer grunted. "And what the hell does that mean?" "That," Wolfe said, "is why we are here. Because only the guilty can interpret it." The silence tightened like rope around Green's neck. Vivian shifted, diamonds trembling. Harriman's fingers drummed his knee. Bellamy sweated as if the room had no air. Wolfe leaned forward, voice deep as a funeral bell. "Consider, Lydia Vance was frightened, clutching her handbag. She was silenced and her handbag vanished. Green, weak of constitution, was silenced next, his death arranged as melodrama. Both deaths preserve one secret, that Harriman and Green laundered money through forged manuscripts. Who profited? Who feared exposure?" "Not me," Harriman barked. "I run a publishing house, not a bank." "Yet you invested," Wolfe said coldly. "And you knew Lydia carried the notebook. You knew it because you sent her with it, as mule." Vivian gasped. "He's right. Lydia told me she was carrying something." Harriman swung on her. "You hysterical fool." Enough, Wolfe thundered. The walls vibrated. Each of you lies. Miss Hale, you concealed your funding. Mr. Bellamy, you concealed your correspondence on Russian stationery. Harriman, you conceal your arrogance. And all of you conceal knowledge of the notebook's phrase. He paused. So, let us see who will betray themselves. Wolfe gestured. Archie, read the phrase again. I did. Payment delivered to the man who knew Archie twice. Bellamy's lips twitched. It doesn't mean anything. Nonsense scribble. Wolfe's eyes fixed on him. Oh, yet you flinch. Bellamy swallowed. I don't... Enough, Kramer barked. Wolfe, you're playing games. No, Wolfe said softly. I am placing bait. Only the guilty will bite. He turned his gaze on Harriman. Explain it. I will not, Harriman exploded. This is farce. Miss Hale? Wolfe asked. She paled. I don't know. Archie Goodwin twice? Perhaps he met someone, Kramer grunted. Get to the point, Wolfe. Wolfe raised his hand. Silence fell. Earlier, the phrase admitted two interpretations. Tonight, its ambiguity ends. To the uninvolved, it is gibberish. But when I repeated it, Mr. Harriman, your nostrils flared and your lips compressed. Recognition is confession. Only the guilty comprehend it. He lifted the notebook, held it like scripture. This entry, this mocking reference to Mr. Goodwin, was intended to mask a name. To those who know Archie only in passing, it is absurd. But to one man, it was clever camouflage, because he had indeed known Archie twice, once in business, once outside it. All eyes turned to Bellamy. His face shone, sweat dripping. Wolfe's voice sharpened. Mr. Bellamy, you encountered Archie in Harriman and Green, and years ago, when you were a copyboy at the Gazette, you fetched proofs to him, twice. You alone understood. You alone tremble. Bellamy stammered. I don't, Vivian Hale gasped. Marcus? Kramer surged to his feet. So he's the one? Sit, Wolfe commanded, and Kramer, against instinct, obeyed. Wolfe's gaze skewered Bellamy. You forged the manuscript. You encoded the ledgers. You exploited Lydia as mule. When she suspected, you silenced her with cyanide. Green, weak and nervous, threatened to expose you. You staged his death as suicide, and you thought yourself clever, hiding behind Nabokov's shadow. Phooey. You are a plagiarist of both prose and crime. Bellamy crumpled, hands shaking. I didn't. Archie, Wolfe said, record this confession. Then, more sharply. But note well, this is the executor, not the author. The hand that held the pen is still hidden. We are not finished. Kramer growled. We'll drag it out of him at Centre Street. Stebbins. Purley stepped forward, cuffs ready. Bellamy collapsed into the chair, sobbing. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed. So ends the theatre. Take him, Inspector, and may the press enjoy the irony that literature served as camouflage for crime. Kramer lit a fresh cigar, smoke curling like victory. For once, Wolfe, you delivered. Don't gloat. Phooey, Wolfe murmured. As they hauled Bellamy out, Vivian Hale slumped, diamonds dull, and Harriman muttered curses at the ceiling. I closed my notebook, leaned back and said, Well, boss, you staged a hit. Broadway would envy the box office. Wolfe opened his eyes, reached for Fritz's waiting beer and said, Archie, theatre is for children. This was deduction. I grinned. Deduction with a spotlight. He shut his eyes again, sipping. Outside, the rain tapped the windows like applause. Minutes after Stebbins marched Harriman out in cuffs, curses trailing down the stoop, the brownstone had absorbed enough thunder to last the week. The rain had quit an hour earlier, leaving the air slick with the kind of silence only New York manages after a storm, reluctant, wary, waiting for the next cab horn or newspaper shout to shatter it. Inside, Wolfe's office smelled of cigar ash, damp wool, and triumph. Kramer was the last holdout, planted in his chair like a tree that had grown roots in my rug. He puffed his mangled cigar with such ferocity that if Fritz had appeared with a vacuum, I wouldn't have blamed him. Stebbins had already marched Harriman out. Bellamy was crumbling on the sidewalk. Vivian Hale had departed in a swell of perfume and reproach. But Kramer lingered, chewing, glaring, occasionally making noises deep in his throat like an engine that refused to turn over. Wolfe had already leaned back, the folds of his silk robe rearranged like theatre curtains after the show. His eyes were half closed. For Wolfe, this wasn't fatigue but digestion, digesting victory, not food. His fingers drummed the chair arm in lazy satisfaction. Kramer broke first. "Damn it, Wolfe," he growled. "One of these days you'll pull this stunt and come up empty. Then I'll have you in front of the commissioner, and no Latin phrase will save your hide." Wolfe opened his eyes, slowly, like an emperor deigning to notice the supplicant. "Inspector, you have once again reaped the harvest without sowing the seed. Spare me your rancor. You have your murderer. I have my peace." Kramer slapped his thigh. "Peace? 2 people dead, a publishing house gutted, and you call it peace?" "I call it order restored," Wolfe corrected, voice low and resonant. "Fraud and violence concealed within the vanities of literature, unmasked. That is peace." I said, "He's not wrong, Inspector. When publishers start forging Nabokov for ledgers, you know civilization's circling the drain. But look at the bright side. You've bagged yourself a king-sized crook without mussing your trench coat." Kramer glared at me. "Goodwin, if you ever get tired of fetching beer for him, the department could use a wiseacre in the press office." "Tempting," I said, "but I'm partial to my current arrangement. My boss may be a tyrant, but at least the office decor is walnut instead of linoleum." Kramer rose, the springs of his chair sighing relief. "All right, you win this round, but if Harriman slips, if some lawyer wriggles him loose, it's on your conscience." "Phooey," Wolfe said, eyes closing again. Kramer grunted, jammed his cigar between his teeth and stomped out. The door slammed, vibrating the glass panes. Silence swelled in his wake, the kind that feels less like calm and more like a room exhaling. I closed my notebook and slid it into the desk drawer. Well, that ties it up in a bow. 1 poisoned secretary, 1 hanged partner, 1 humiliated heiress, and a sweating editor who'll be telling his shrink about this night for the next decade. Publishing, I tell you, it's murder. Wolfe lifted one eyelid. "Your levity is unseemly." "Levity is how I keep from drowning," I said. "Blondes who read Nabokov and phone at midnight don't usually live long enough to keep appointments. Maybe I ought to switch to brunettes who read cookbooks." Wolfe's lip twitched, the closest he comes to laughter. He reached for the bell cord. A moment later, Fritz appeared, silent and efficient as always, carrying a tray with 2 sweating bottles of beer, 1 glass already frosted. Wolfe took his with a grunt of satisfaction. I snagged the other. "To Lydia," I said, raising mine. "She deserved better than gin and cyanide." "To order," Wolfe countered, clinking his glass with mine before taking a slow, reverent sip. The clock read 11:46. Wolfe drained half his beer, then heaved himself up. "Archie, I am fatigued. Tomorrow at 9, orchids. At 1, lunch. Until then, leave me undisturbed." He swept out, robes billowing, headed toward the elevator. The doors shut with their usual sigh. I leaned back, sipping my beer, listening to the brownstones settle into quiet. Rainwater dripped somewhere outside, ticking like a typewriter left on overnight. Civilization, such as it was, had survived another skirmish thanks to Wolfe's intellect, Kramer's temper, and my ability to answer telephones past midnight. I picked up my pen again and jotted the final note in my book. Order restored. Orchids tomorrow. Case closed. But remind Wolfe, Nabokov probably never imagined his prose would be used to launder money, or to get a blonde killed on West 35th Street. Then I snapped the notebook shut and let the silence have the room.